What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Progressive Gentleman Podcast. As always, we're your hosts. I'm Dan.
I'm Matt.
And thank you for taking the time to nerd out about music with us. This episode is brought to you by Eargasm Earplugs. Use code GENTLEMAN10 at checkout and take the step to protect your hearing today. It feels like it's been a year since I've said that.
Yeah, it has been a while.
Sorry about that. I know we kind of approached this year as like, this is going to be the year of content, and we kind of
did
really
the opposite.
We really dropped the ball on that. I mean, we make every excuse in the book, but I think we have a couple fair ones. I was sent out of the country for my job, and Matt obviously is full-time work, full-time student at the same time, and he's sort of approaching the end of his master's program, so it doesn't get easier as you go. That's not really how that works.
Yeah, and it's buttoning up the resume and all that extra stuff that the end of the timeline.
Yep.
Plus, like with you being in another country, it's with like a 9-hour time zone difference is a little bit hard for us to find time to record together.
Yeah, it made it tough. And yeah, I mean, my job's been crazy. It's starting to calm down. Hopefully, I don't want to like jinx myself, but things are getting a little bit better with that. And I went through, had a loss in the family, and then on top of that, had some. My mother-in-law was moving closer, so helped her move, and that seemed like the never-ending move. But we finally got that done and squared away, and so a lot of things moving in the personal lives over here. But hopefully, all trending towards being able to do this more frequently. One update on the podcast: we got verified on Instagram, so that's pretty sweet. So thanks for everybody contributing to that. We've been on charts, and I didn't do the stats for this. This would have been a good time for it, but we were on charts in at least 6 countries this year, which is awesome, including hitting number 1 in Italy multiple times. So shout out to all of our
there was like
Italian listeners.
Quite a several week stretch where we were like number 1 in like music podcasts in Italy
which is awesome.
Over a month. That was pretty cool.
So a lot of firsts for us because that we had never hit number 1. We'd hit charts before, but never number 1. So shout out to all of our listeners in Italy, and yeah, a lot of cool stuff despite the fact that it seems like we've been gone for a while. So thank you to everybody who continues to support us, and hopefully we can keep bringing you more content. That is always the goal. Speaking of the content, this is one of our favorite episodes. This is usually our most popular episode. And that's kind of our album of the year episode, our sort of recap of everything, and then bringing everything together into these were the records that stood out the most to us this year. If you follow us on Instagram, you know we're currently doing a fan voted album of the year, which has been pretty sweet. We've had a good amount of participation in these contests, these different head-to-head matchups in this album of the year bracket that we threw together.
Yeah, it's cool to see, like, because if, it's kind of mostly a one-way thing where we just say what we like and people listen to it. I mean, we get feedback from people and like comments and stuff, but, it's largely like just here's what we like, and we don't get to hear much about what other people like. So this is cool to see, like, where these albums are ranking for the people that listen to the podcast is kind of our way of getting like feedback from them and hearing their album of the year. I mean, obviously it's a like aggregated album of the year, not everyone's individual. But it is
cool too. It seems like participation is mostly from listeners too. Like, I mean, obviously we're a public page, so like that stuff is exposed to the outside, and I've seen so many contests on other social media pages where it just turns into a popularity contest of like, I'm not going to completely throw this fan base under the bus because I'm part of it, but the Coheed fan base really shows out for shit like this. So like, it takes one person. It takes one person sharing it on like a Coheed fan page, and then all of a sudden it's bombarded with thousands of votes. So like, I'm happy that didn't happen here. Just based on the statistics, it has not happened here. So it's
I was going to say
really.
I don't feel like any of the matchups have been like crazy blowouts where it's like 100% to 0 or anything like that. It's like usually like fairly close. Like you can tell that there was a fair voting.
Yeah. So it's been nice. It's been nice to see that this is sort of seemingly an accurate representation of the people who follow the page and listen to the podcast, sort of what they would vote for. Obviously, there are some things that we're missing from these brackets. We've gotten some feedback and messages and all that stuff about like, why wasn't this one in there? Well, you should have told us that whenever we asked earlier.
Yeah, I think because we did get some like things trickle in after we had like proposed the like, hey, we want to do this, and then we had already made the list. And there's a lot of behind the scenes with making the thumbnails and stuff, like, the images to post.
Yeah, we did post polls, sort of, not polls, but question and answer type things on Instagram, like what albums should be on this. And we got a decent amount of feedback, and every single one of those, I believe we put in the bracket. Every single one that wasn't an EP, because we did get a couple EP suggestions. Just a reminder, we don't put EPs into our album of the year because that doesn't seem fair just from a body of work perspective. But yeah, no, it's been pretty cool to see the response to this, how many people are actually actively voting on things. It's been fun. It's been fun. Some of these votes did not go the way I would have voted, and we can touch more on that. I think we'll probably do a follow-up episode once the voting's finally finished. As of right now, and probably as of the time you're listening to this, I think we're probably pretty close to the finals. I think we're in the semifinals right now as we record this. But
yeah, I think we've got like one more matchup in the semifinals.
Yeah, so it's definitely wrapping up there. But like I said, I wouldn't necessarily voted the way some of these went, which was what makes it interesting. So
yeah,
I'm definitely interested to see sort of who comes out on top. I think I kind of have a guess just based on the way the votes have been going, who's going to finish on top. But I'm not going to jump ahead of it and see.
Yeah.
I'm going to wait and see.
Well, I think also the fact that like the album of the year we're doing bracket style for the community thing lends it to like not maybe necessarily turn out to be like what true albums of the year are,
we had some rough matchups early.
Yeah, and so like some of them is like Opeth and Caligula's Horse matchup and stuff.
Yeah,
to
that's
mention
rough.
One of them was
Vola got knocked out pretty early, and there were some other ones. Yeah.
So it was like, and I mean, it was hard because we had to like make up our own seeding method to like
kind
make
of
some good.
Relatively randomized it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like it ended up with some of the matchups being more difficult because of who won. And,
but ultimately, like if they were going to lose in that matchup, they were going to lose eventually, kind of thing. So like this isn't really this isn't to like come up with a 1 through 10 like what we're going to do today, like with what we did together. This is more of just who comes out on top. So just because an album gets knocked out in the final 4 on this bracket doesn't mean that that's a top 4 record necessarily. So
yeah, we're just coming up with an album of the year for that one.
Exactly. But yeah, so that's been a lot of fun. But yeah, this episode is more specifically to like what we feel our top 10 albums of the year are, and we're actually going to throw a curveball and do an EP of the year. Because there were a decent amount of good EPs this year, and I feel like we always neglect EPs, and we're not going to do a deep dive into all the EPs that were released this year. We're just going to kind of talk about what our favorite EP of the year was.
Since we don't include it on the album of the year, that's like nice to still give them some love, because there are still like, obviously just because it's an EP doesn't mean it's not great. It just because it's shorter, it's like not really fair to compare it to like a 45-minute to an hour-long album when you get like 20 minutes of an EP or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And the clear-cut winner, in my opinion, was the Novelists Okapi EP, and I think you agree with that. So I think that's the winner of our EP of the year. We're not going to do a top 10 or a top 5 with that. And for me, if that was a full-length record, it probably was my album of the year. Two tracks off of that, I think there's only like 4 or 5 songs on it, were in my like most like top 5 most played songs of the year according to Spotify. Like Morning the Dawn and Okapi, like those tracks are incredible.
Those were those. I can't remember the order of the single releases. Were those the 2 first ones that were released?
I think Morning the Dawn was first. Or that's not true, because I think what they lumped into that EP, they lumped that like that that like turn it up song, Keyboard Warrior Social Club or whatever is what they called it.
Oh yeah.
That was the first track that they released with the new singer. Um, and it was okay, but then the next 3 tracks that they released with the new singer were incredible, and I can't wait to see the direction. I know they're releasing a full length record. Well, I believe they're releasing a full length record. I think it was announced this coming year, so that they'll definitely be on our radar for next year. I know they've released 2 singles from that. One's called Coda and one's called KO. I've been listening to KO too much, probably. So
it's become unhealthy.
It's heavily on my radar for next year. I'm a sucker for a lot of different things, and I'll probably say that a couple times as we start reviewing some of these records. But one of those things is female vocals in metal. I'm just a fan. If it works, if it's done right, it's one of my favorite things in metal. And it's done right with this new Novelist singer. And I was a huge fan of Novelists. What the heck was their original singer's name? To the Tobias era of Novelists. I'm pretty sure that was the original singer. And then they switched vocalists and became more of like a electronic-y, hardcore-y type mix. And I didn't like that sound. Like everything C'est La Vie and before for Novelists, I love that stuff. And then they came out with that Deja Vu record, not a fan. And now with the new singer, I feel like they're sort of going back to that like C'est La Vie era, like back to their roots, and just with like a new sound with a female vocalist that I think they're doing it amazing. I think it's gonna be great.
It's like heavy when it needs to be, and like they also have like catchy hooks to the songs, like cool grooves and stuff. Like it's kind of got it all. It's very like that EP has got some real good tracks on it. It's just a bummer it's not longer.
Yes, I agree. I really thought it was going to lead up to like a full length release. Maybe like coming early 2025 whenever they first released it, and then they sort of announced, oh, this is just an EP. Like this is a kind of like what Spiritbox did with sort of how they drop singles and then put those singles into like a collection, and then all of a sudden drop a record and none of those singles are on the record. Like they're kind of taking that approach.
Yeah, it's like EP into surprise album drop.
Yeah, so it seems like KO and Coda, the 2 new singles, are going to be on a major release, which I think was announced. I just don't want to say that like as this definitely happened and then be wrong. But I think that is announced as like they're going to have a full record next year.
That's cool.
So really looking forward to that. But yeah, Okapi, Novelist, EP of the year, clear cut, and in my opinion, and I think yours as well, great. Just a great collection of music.
Yeah, I didn't listen to a ton as far as the EPs went. Just the nature of being so crazy busy. It was like trying to like rank all these albums. So I kind of like some of the EPs did go to the wayside of like, I don't have time for these ones that I'm not going to be ranking. But now that like it's done, I can, spend more time with those other ones. But I did spend a good bit of time with the Okapi EP and.
Yeah, the only other one I'll shout out is Stereo Grief by Greyhaven. That EP was a really excellent collection of music. So
I haven't got a chance to listen to that one yet, but I have heard really good things. It's on my my list to listen to like after we're done with this.
Yeah, I know we got a couple we got a little bit of grief, Stereo Grief, funny, for not having that in our album of the year bracket, but because it's an EP, that's why it wasn't in there.
Not because it's not good, just
right?
Because we don't include EPs.
Exactly, but yeah, that's if you got 20 minutes, go listen to that EP. But yeah, so let's get into the meat and potatoes here. We always usually start with 10, work our way to 1. We're gonna throw 2 honorable mentions in there as well. These are records that made at least one of our individual top 10 lists as we were sort of coming up with a collective top 10, but maybe just barely missed the cut. First one being Interval's Memory Palace. That's our first honorable mention. Aaron Marshall's a genius. He
Yes,
just
he
is.
is.
And I mean, he writes arguably the catchiest hooks in all of instrumental progressive music. That's just also kind of an objective truth. Uh,
Yeah, it's like even if you're not necessarily a fan of like specifically like instrumental music, it's like he has such catchy hooks that like he doesn't necessarily need a vocalist because
no,
his guitar is doing the vocals for him,
yeah,
and
and
he makes it sing.
I've said this so many times. I would kill for his guitar tone. Like I
Yeah.
want that. So, I mean, one of my favorite modern guitarists of all time. He's awesome, and yeah, the music that they write together in intervals is fantastic. It just for me wasn't enough of like a step for like it just everything he writes is great, but there's not a whole lot of differentiation for me personally to be like, oh, this is something new and exciting. Still amazing,
Yeah,
but
I did
like
like he included some. There was almost like some like lo-fi and like electronic-y
yeah,
elements that he added in, which is like kind of new. But aside from that, like he didn't really like change up the tone of his guitar, which
which he
like you.
shouldn't.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like you mentioned, it is a spectacular tone. But I think when you don't have a vocalist and it's very like guitar forward, and you keep the same tone and like don't do anything like super different, then it's like it kind of makes it hard to maybe make it an album of the year, at least like as far as I'm concerned.
And
It's
it's
kind of like
probably
Animals as
like
Leaders, like
yeah,
when they came out with Parisia, it was like it's a great album, but it's more Animals as Leaders.
and sort of thinking on that too, it probably makes it harder for instrumental bands to sort of differentiate themselves record to record because of the fact that they don't like have a vocalist. So it's like, well, what do you do differently? Like you can't change up your vocal style, you can't change up like
More
and
pedals.
and when yeah, more pedals or more instruments, I guess. Like that I mean,
Yeah.
I try to come up with like mixing in different styles I don't know. I think it does kind of put them behind or
It
put them at
definitely
a
makes it tougher for
disadvantage.
sure, which I think speaks volumes to the fact that it's like still such a highly ranked album for us. It was like despite it being like he already has such impressive catalog of music and you're still churning out stuff that's like maybe not necessarily top 10 for us, but like just barely missed the top 10.
Yeah.
So like still a
Yeah.
spectacular
So
album.
still a great record. And then just to not waste too much more time on the honorable mentions, we'll throw out the other one, which is Darkest Hour, Perpetual Terminal. Um, not
Big
for
fan of
anything.
Darkest Hour here.
Yeah, not for anything spectacular. This record isn't gonna wow many people, but for the people who love the record Deliver Us as much as I do, um, this was almost like an ode to that record. They had just recently toured that record in its entirety. And I think it rubbed off on their writing process because while this isn't like a front to back makes you, Deliver Us for me is I'm going to sit down and listen to it front to back. I don't feel that way necessarily about Perpetual Terminal, but there are tracks on this record that I feel like you could mix in with Deliver Us and just have like it was almost flashbacks to that record.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah, it
maybe
is.
with a little Undying Ruin mixed in.
Yeah,
Just old school Darkest Hour.
I feel like if you haven't listened to Darkest Hour, then like this may be like you were saying about like it's not like anything earth shattering, but like maybe it would be for you if you hadn't listened to like Undoing Ruin.
Yeah, if you discovered Darkest Hour with like uh what was that? What was the record right before this one? Like or with even with their self-titled Forward, like the 2014 self-titled Forward. Like if you discovered them around that time or with the Godless Prophets and Migrant Flora, that was the record I was trying to remember what the hell the name was. I feel like this probably was a pretty big departure from their sound on those two records. And then yeah, for old school heads, if you were Deliver Us, Undying Ruin, like if you were discovered them around then, I think this was sort of like a flashback almost. Like just listening to Goddess of War, Give Me Something to Die For, just immediately brought me back to Deliver Us.
Yeah. I also really enjoyed the Nihilist Undone and One with the Void. Those were some of the, like two of the
Yeah,
other standout tracks that I
and the
enjoyed there.
self-titled track's good too. Perpetual Terminal, the self-titled track.
Yeah, I feel like there's not a
Or yeah,
bad track. It's just
the
like,
album, the title track, not self-titled track.
yeah, I know what you meant.
Yeah, we
um,
get there eventually.
but yeah, I think like there's not a bad track on the album, but I think there are some that are just like not necessarily standout ones, but there are a handful of really good ones that kind of have that like throwback to, you know, their first couple albums. So if you
Yeah, yeah, definitely a record where it's like I picked a couple songs and put them on a playlist, but I don't necessarily go replay the whole record kind of
yeah.
thing. But yeah, that was those were our two honorable mentions, and two great records that just barely missed. There were some other ones that probably could be in this. It was a really good year for music. Um, but time to jump into to the real meat and potatoes here. The top 10, starting at number 10. The record is called Freaks. The band is Avrilize. And Matt, I'm going to lean more on you on this one because I think you spent a little more time with this record than me. But I will start off just saying it's a good metalcore record.
Yeah,
Uh,
I feel like for anyone, actually, I had never heard of them, but my buddy Nate, shout out to Nate if you listen to the episode, he had suggested them to me and told me like how good this album was, and I think it fits in that like monuments, currents, like invent animate sort of like cluster of like progressive metalcore. It kind of fits pretty neatly in there. I mean, they do some different stuff, and I feel like they lean a little heavier into like the kind of electronic-y stuff that they throw
yeah,
in.
I was going to
Um,
say that too. I have that written down. I mean, they have a lot of those like melodic hooks that you see from like Invent Animate
yeah, and there's some
and
of the like,
Era even.
yeah, Air is a good one too. Um, they like they even do a little bit of the like squealy like thing that Invent Animate and Currents do, where it just like kind of randomly throw in some, you know, some what was like pinch harmonics kind of
Yeah.
things,
Yep.
and it's just kind of out of the blue. So it has a lot of like notes of like kind of the, you know, like the A tier, S tier, like
Yeah.
progressive metalcore bands. And so if you've not heard of them, like this definitely scratches that itch for sure. Check it out. The two standout tracks for me, I don't remember if I said this or not, but the Canvas and Overdose were two of my favorites.
Yeah, and this is their first record, if I'm not mistaken, too. I think this is sort of their like debut album, so not necessarily anything crazy groundbreaking, but at the same time, if we're comparing them to bands like Invent Animate and Era and Currents and all these masterclass metalcore, bands out there today, obviously the technical skills are there. If you're looking for more good metalcore, Freaks by Avrilize, definitely a great record.
Yeah, it's solid for sure. And thanks again, Nate, for the shout out and helping me discover a new band.
Hell yeah. Moving on to number 9, Vola, Friend of a Phantom.
Yeah,
So,
they
just
make it
really good
another appearance every
songwriting.
time they put out an album. They make it our top
Yeah,
10 list.
just a band with great songwriting. I would say this record has some of their heaviest tracks to date. Um, like Cannibal might be one of my favorite Vola tracks in their discography. I was a big fan of that track.
Yeah,
Um,
that track is really good. That's was the singer from In
In
Flames.
Flames,
Yeah,
yeah.
that one is
But I will say this, it's in our number 9 spot. I feel like Witness was probably a lot higher. I do feel like this was a step backwards from Witness in some ways. That might just be a personal preference. I don't know. Which record between this one and Witness do you prefer?
for me definitely Witness is higher on my list. It was actually my album of the year that year.
That's right. That's right.
Which like now with some more time spent, like Delta Sleep's Spring Island was second. I might flip those now, like in hindsight, but
Yeah.
it would still be for sure in my top three of that year. So this one didn't come in quite as high, and I feel like it's because similar to what we are talking about with intervals, it was like kind of more of the same, but um like they added more harsh vocals and stuff, which was cool. But I feel like they didn't do like necessarily enough different stuff to like kind of wow me from Witness because I loved that album so much. Um and I feel like there are fewer standout tracks in this album than in Witness. It's still great, but um not quite as like front to back great as I think Witness was.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I do think some of the tracks are like their heaviest tracks to date, but like at the same time, I mean, Vola's always been more of like an experimental band
Yeah.
in their sound. Like a lot of that experimentation coming in the form of like electronic synthy sound, synthy type stuff mixed into their sound. Um, they do that a decent amount on this record. I agree with you. There's not really much aside from Cannibal, which again I will say that's probably one of my favorite Vola tracks ever.
Yeah.
Nothing super stands out to me. Kind of what I was saying with Darkest Hours record, like there are tracks on this record that I would probably pull out and put into a playlist and listen to a lot. But the record as a whole, like I don't feel like I would revisit it and listen to it in its entirety, like down the line.
Yeah, I think it's funny because of the like listening to my favorite tracks, like Cannibal was one of mine as well. But then I also had We Will Not Disband, which I feel was more like Euro poppy.
Yeah.
So it's just funny that like the juxtaposition of my two favorite albums are like both ends of the Vola spectrum of music. There's just such like a catchy, like genty groove in We Will Not Disband, and I do enjoy like their mix of that kind of like Euro synth pop kind of sound with like something like Cannibal where they have like the harsh vocals and it's much more like Meshuggah esque. So I do enjoy that, and I do think like as far as the direction they took, like they could have like while it wasn't a drastic change, the changes they did make I liked. I just kind of wish they would have like leaned into
it. Yeah, that's how I felt too. Like that's why I feel like, and when we're being critical of records, like I think we're just more justifying why it's at 9 and not at like 2 or 3. Like this is less. This is less like us grilling this record because it wasn't good enough. The record's great. This is just more of like why it didn't land higher.
I feel like that's kind of our. Whenever we talk our top 10, it's all like why these all weren't tied for first place.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So when we're being critical, it's more of just like, this is why this wasn't at the top, not like, oh, this album's a piece of shit. We give it number 9. Like, there were 50 some records that we were weighing whenever we came up with this top. I mean, probably more than that at this point, but when we're weighing sort of a top 10. So it beat out quite a few really good records to make it here. So Vola's awesome. Their music's incredible. I really hope I get to see them live this year. I've yet to see them live. That is on top on my list. I do think they're coming. I might be wrong.
Yeah, I think I want to say it's in April.
Everything's in April.
There's so many concerts in April. I'm gonna have to stop attending class for like 2 weeks.
Like it's insane how many shows are coming in April, but. Yeah, so Vola, Friend of a Phantom, number 9, great record. Moving on to number 8, controversial one, and one that is going to shock a lot of people, especially if you've listened to the podcast before, on how many times I have shit on this band / artist, whatever you want to call this. Like I've shit on this band more than most. And that is Poppy, Negative Spaces. We have at number 8, and I actually had it higher on my personal list. If that is shocking, and I've literally, like, I've taken time out, like unrelated conversations have somehow gone to me shitting on Poppy on previous episodes.
Yeah, I think it's funny because of like getting a text message from you being like, the new Poppy album is out and it's very good. And I was like, who are you? And what have you done with Dan? Because like hearing you say that is just like, I knew how much you didn't really like the sound that
it was just this gimmicky bullshit, dude. Like there were other artists that were doing it too. And like, she didn't fully abandon the gimmicky bullshit. Like there's still a little bit of it in there. But with how minor it is, it almost just feels like if you didn't know her prior work, you'd be like, oh, she's just experimenting with something weird, and oh, now it's back to like
Yeah.
on her normal sound. Like I don't know. So like the fact that she's on this list after years of me just shitting on her as an artist should tell you all you need to know about this record. If you have like me have been shitting on Poppy forever and that's prevented you from listening to this record, go listen to this record.
It
I
is
feel like
really, really good. I feel like she's finally found, it's like after all of that gimmicky stuff and like experimenting with weird stuff, has like found what works
yeah.
and like
And don't get me
honed
wrong,
in.
she's still weird. Like she's still a weird
We're
human
all weird
being.
though.
But yeah, we're all weird. But like for the most part, she's abandoned all that gimmicky bullshit and like embraced more of what I'm calling like an adult style of metal. Like it seems like she's sort of been tutoring under like a lot more of the more prominent like modern heavy music acts like Bad Omens and Knocked Loose and Spirit Box. Like, you know, she's done
Yeah.
features on Bad Omens and Knocked Loose tracks, and then you see her on stage with Courtney LaPlante in Spirit Box, and her vocal style is obviously very unique.
Yeah.
It sounds much better recorded than it does live, just from what I've seen. But at the same time, I feel like she wrote a metalcore record. Like that's what this is, and it's a good metalcore record. And I think what probably put it so high on my list was how much progress she's made from her previous sort of recordings, albums, whatever. Like just the pure shock of like, oh my god, I actually enjoy this. I think is probably why this climbed so high on my list personally. But I have listened to this record too much. There are like really catchy breakdowns, really catchy choruses. The lyrics aren't super weird. Like she's not trying to pretend like she's like a K-pop artist doing metal. Like it's interesting. It's good. It's
Yeah.
actually good.
I do there's some elements of like some kind of hardcore esque, which
Yeah.
I'm guessing that probably came from like
From her
working
time
with Knocked
with
Loose.
Knocked Loose. Yeah, because there's one track I'm trying to remember the name of it. It might be like Nobody. Um, I'm trying to pull it up right now, but there is a track on this that's just a straight up hardcore song. Like that's just
Yeah.
what it is.
That's what I was to say. So like she's still definitely like experimenting with stuff, but I feel like she's found something, at least in my opinion, that works. And I'm guessing she probably felt that too and like found the sound and has like leaned into it. And I feel like she's leaning into the right parts.
Yeah.
And
And like if she wants to experiment from here and like evolve this sound into something more unique, because there are songs on here that aren't necessarily unique. It's just such a growth from from her that it's just like it makes it
yeah.
sound unique. But like, you know, songs like The Cost of Giving Up or They're All Around Us or New Way Out, like all three of those songs could be Spirit Box songs, honestly.
Yeah, I do feel like she's definitely in that, like her sound now, where she's like honed into, is very much in that Bad Omens Spirit Box thing. Like,
And that
it
clearly
kinda,
works for those artists because they're
yeah,
getting nominated for Grammys and selling out stadiums and all this crazy shit. So like it clearly works.
yeah,
You know, and technically she was nominated for a Grammy with her feature on that Knocked Loose track. Suffocate
oh yeah,
was
that's true. Yeah,
nominated for Metal Performance of the Year. So I mean, she's come a long way. Obviously, she had a weird cult following as it was. I'm real interested what their take on her going like oh, she gone mainstream or whatever the fuck you want to call it. But like I'd be curious to know like the people who liked the weird shit. Like I'm not going to go too far into the. I'm not going to rant, but you know, I'd be curious to know how they feel about her making good music now.
I think like the fact that like the drastic change has put it more in line of like a more quote unquote pop culture as far as like metal goes, makes it more listenable. And like I I'm not like a K-pop person or anything. Like it doesn't really like that doesn't do much for me. But like, you know, I appreciate that she was trying to like fuse some like things that aren't like necessarily like often put together. Um and like to me it didn't like necessarily work in like in my opinion, but like I appreciated it. But this album, like I do appreciate what she's doing, and I think it is like a better album overall. And like you said, like the growth from her previous albums to here is like massive.
And there's just like there's growth on the instrumental side of things too, in my opinion. Like I feel like it was very much a focus on her. Like it was almost like she wanted to be a pop artist but wasn't succeeding there. So she needed to like, and like all of her following was just based on the weird videos that she would post on like YouTube and shit.
I've
And
never
then
watched
it's
any
like,
of the
oh
videos.
dude, they're freaking weird, dude. But I almost feel like she's like, all right, well, if the pop vocals stuff isn't working out, let me lean into this weird shit. And then she was like involved with some of those like weird, like mumble rap, kind of rock type artists or whatever. So then she was like, oh, well, maybe I can do the weird shit mixed with like heavy music shit. And then that wasn't, I mean, in my opinion, it was niched, but it wasn't really taking off. But I feel like she found a home now with like, you know, seeing Courtney LaPlante and Spiritbox and how quickly they sort of rose to popularity. I think like she saw that as a window of opportunity. Like I can do that too. And I think maybe she was a little bit, and again, this is all speculation. I don't fucking talk to her, but like I think maybe she was feeling sort of insecure about doing vocals because her vocal style isn't necessarily traditional, like her harsh vocal style. And then she did a song with fucking Knocked Loose, who is the definition of non-traditional vocal style. And maybe
and
that
fit
gave her a
very
little more
well.
confidence. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
overall, I hope she stays on this track. I hope this wasn't just like a, hey, look, I can do this too, and then goes back to all nothing but weird shit. Like,
I do hope that
she
she
really
continues.
doubles down.
Yeah, continues to lean into this because I definitely like the sound of this album better than her previous ones for sure.
So that was number 8, Poppy, Negative Spaces. I'm not going to rant anymore. I feel like I could probably rant on that for a while, but
It is funny though. It's like despite like Duncan on previous albums,
oh yeah,
as like this album is very good. It's worth checking out, and that was kind of the point, was to say like how much the albums have grown, not to necessarily just like dunk on the previous albums.
Because all you Poppy haters out there, I was with you I was firmly with you until she dropped this record. So I will defend my stance on this record, but I will also defend my stance on shitting on everything else that she's done.
And I think also the fact that you're like, and you're willing to listen to it and like admit like this is a good album, and like change your viewpoint is shows like, and I think speaks volumes, because you could still be in that camp of like, well, another Poppy album. I don't like Poppy, but you're giving the kudos where they're due.
I try to give every album, every band a chance. Like if someone tells me, hey, this is worth looking at, even if previously I've not agreed necessarily, like I'm gonna look at it and I'm gonna listen to it. And I'm always willing. Like, hey, how many chances did I give Dance Gavin Dance? Like,
I mean, you did a whole discography dive, and analyzed the lyrics and stuff. So yeah,
I mean, I'm always willing to do that. But so moving on to a band that just discovered this year, and I think they probably just started to exist recently, because isn't this their first record?
Yes,
I'm pretty sure. So like,
I think they had an EP come out.
So when you hear, hey, a super band is forming with members of Every Time I Die, Dillinger Escape Plan, and Fit for an Autopsy, I feel like just about everyone in our scene would probably be like, oh shit, I need to go listen to that. So that band is Better Lovers, if you've not heard of them. Better Lovers.
Which admittedly is a weird name, but...
Very weird name, but basically most of Every Time I Die, with like one guy from Dillinger, this old singer from Dillinger, and then...
it was Greg Pucciato, whatever. I think
and
his
the
name
guitarist
is
from Fit for an Autopsy, I think. But regardless, Better Lovers, Highly Irresponsible. That's an awesome mix, and it's funny because like the record is exactly what I would expect to come out of that mix.
Yeah,
like it's literally like if you put like Dillinger's discography, Every Time I Die's discography, and then like. So and then just put like blend in a little bit of like Fit for an Autopsy and like put that through some kind of AI generator, it was gonna spit out this record. Like,
it's definitely
it's wild.
Like instrumentally, it's mostly Every Time I Die.
Yes,
with Dillinger vocals.
Yes,
but they do also do a lot of the weird like change ups and like hard cuts like Dillinger does,
Yeah.
but it's like the guitar tone of Every Time I Die. So
Yeah,
if
with
that
the
sounds
occasional like succumbing to like the heavier instincts of someone who probably plays in a deathcore band like Fit for an Autopsy.
yeah,
Like
I was gonna
it's
say it's like
it's
like
just
the
a
Fit for an
tinge, it's just a little dash.
Yeah, that's like the you sprinkle a little bit of like cinnamon on top.
Yeah.
It's like a little flavor in there, but it's mostly like Every Time I Die and Dillinger sound. So if that sounds appealing to you and you've not heard of the formation of this band, for sure, give it a listen. It's really good.
And it's crazy cuz like Every Time I Die covers like a good broad spectrum of music, and then Dillinger being what Dillinger was, and then or is did they I don't know if they came back. They might have just came back to play a show or something.
Yeah, I was gonna
I
say
don't know if they're fully back or not.
I don't know if they're fully back. I do think I heard something about they were like doing some kind of tour or something. Like they were
Yeah.
like performing some shows.
I'm pretty sure we talked about it on the podcast, but I forget. There's probably an
Yeah.
episode somewhere. But like they really this form, this Better Lovers band seems to really stretch across that spectrum too. So like at times I feel like I'm listening to a Dillinger record or even like a Between the Buried and Me record at times. Somehow like the combination starts to sound like Coma or like Automata era, like Between the Buried and Me. And then at other times I feel like I'm playing like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 or some shit, and I'm listening to just straight up punk music. Like Future Myopa is one of those songs where I feel like Dillinger, Between the Buried and Me type sound. But then a white horse covered in blood, I feel like I'm just skating, and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, like straight up punk vibes.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting to see sort of how it can go from one end of the spectrum to the other so quickly, which is what a band like Dillinger always did. What a band like Every Time I Die was always more on the punk side of things, but like hardcore leaning. It's just an interesting mix. It's a cool mix. It's one that I didn't know I needed until it existed.
Yeah.
And it's always good to like, cause I love Dillinger's Escape Plan. So like having a band that really heavily reminds me of Dillinger has been cool, and spent a lot of time with this record. And honestly, it wasn't on my radar until later in the year. So like, I'm glad it was eventually.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think the like last sort of Dillinger adjacent thing that we got was Greg. I think he recorded it was like with Carpenter Brute or whatever, that like electronic artist, and he did like a mashup.
Oh yeah, that's right. I do
with
remember
that like last year or 2 years ago, and that was a
Yeah.
really cool track, but it was not Dillinger.
Right.
It was just like you got the vocal, so you got like a little taste. And so like having something to like really scratch that Dillinger Escape Plan itch is nice. It's a really good album.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I think my favorite track, which you didn't mention, was Superman Died Paralyzed. I think was my favorite from that album. So
another good track.
just
Yeah, but go do yourselves a favor. Go listen to that record in its entirety, especially if you're a Dillinger fan.
Yeah.
Or an Every Time I Die fan. I mean, there's a lot of people who are, had such a gaping hole left in their heart once Every Time I Die sort of hung it up. So this, I think, really fills that void.
well,
too.
now it sort of works out. It's like 2 Christmases when your parents get divorced kind of thing,
Yeah,
because the was it Keith now is in Many Eyes.
Right. Yeah.
Which like they kind of kept the Every Time I Die sound as well, but he's still singing the same way, so it sounds like another sort of spiritual successor Every Time I Die. So it's kind of like we get 2 Every Time I Dies now.
That's a good shout out. But yeah, absolutely. So yeah, go check out Better Lovers, Highly Irresponsible, number 7 on our list. Moving on to number 6, Fit for an Autopsy's The Nothing That Is. And I know that this would be higher on this list for you. And for me personally, I've strayed a good bit from deathcore. But Fit for an Autopsy sort of always brings me back whenever I'm listening to them. Their ability to sort of blend that atmospheric, melodic element stuff that they do into like the deathcore, death metal sound. Very much like Humanity's Last Breath does. Like it's just that those types of bands really like draw you in. It's not just heavy for the sake of being heavy. There's like atmospheric melodic elements to it that really like captivate you and pull you in.
Yeah, and I feel like they always have like just a little bit of like clean singing, which they throw in at a time that like you don't really expect because like the rest of the album is so like punishingly heavy, and then they throw in clean vocals, and you're like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this. It's kind of it's kind of like when you have an album the other way where it's like mostly clean vocals and then they just like belt out a
Surprise you with something
scream
heavy,
out of
yeah.
nowhere. And it's so like you kind of do it the other way. It's similarly surprising and I think it fits well. And I think there's a lot of really good tracks in this album that are worth checking out if you haven't listened to them previously. Which I mean, we've been talking about them so much that I'm sure probably anyone listening to this has at least like ventured to listen to them a
Right.
couple times.
Yeah, and like their level of experimentation too with like within the deathcore genre has always been something I've appreciated about them, you know, whether it's sprinkling in clean vocals or it's experimenting with something synthy or something, you know, while still remaining just punishingly heavy like you said. Um that's always been something that I've found pretty awesome about Fit for an Autopsy and Humanity's Last Breath, who I feel also does the same thing. And uh yeah, I mean this record is heavy as shit, and probably it might be the only deathcore record that we put on this list. But if you even consider them traditionally, you know, deathcore, death metal, I don't really know what they fall heaviest into, but um, yeah,
Yeah,
probably the heaviest record on this list.
yeah, I was gonna say for me, I had Job for a Cowboys album on like not on my top 10, but I had them like higher up on the list. But yeah, this is the only one, like the only like death metal, deathcore album that made my top 10. And pretty much anything that Will Putney does, which actually I like, I can't remember if he's actually in Better Lovers or if he just mixed the Better Lovers album, but he was
I think he's
involved.
yeah, I was gonna say
And
I think he's either in it or recorded part of it or something.
yeah,
Like
he
yeah.
also helped produce the 4 Year Strong album, which is also super good too. So it's like honestly, I could just have like a top 10 just be Will Putney project.
Nice. But yeah, so Fit for an Autopsy, the Nothing That Is, probably the heaviest track, or not track, heaviest record on our list, and definitely deserving of a top 10 spot, sitting at number 6. Moving on to number 5, another controversial one because they are not prog, but neither are some of these other bands on here. But as we've thrown out there too, we definitely listen to a lot more than just progressive music. All heavy music and really all music in general is fair game. We love music. So with that being said, Knocked Loose, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed to, falls at number 5. Um, to me, this entire record has a feel of like the era of hardcore that I grew up with. You know, 90s, 2000s, bit of modern touches thrown in there, but bands like Madball and Terror and Trapped Under Ice, like all the bands that I listened to that I sort of fell in love with hardcore. Um, like I get a lot of those vibes here, obviously more modern, but I mean, I grew up as a fan of hardcore music, so I think Knocked Loose was an acquired taste for me. I don't know. It's probably the same for everybody. Just the vocals are an acquired taste. They always have been.
Yeah, I think
Um,
Brian's vocals, they're so unique, which is cool. Like you know, I mean, there's only so much you can do in like hardcore music because I feel like it's not you know, you're not playing like super complex chord progressions and crazy
right.
time signature changes and stuff. It's mostly like a bunch of chuggy riffs and stuff. Um, so like it's cool to have you know the different vocals and you know I know it's very divisive. Like some people hate his vocals and other
I
people
was
love
one of
them.
those people. I was one of those people. Honestly, I feel like for a lot of people, Laugh Tracks was the record where like it just clicked for you. Like you either loved it or you hated it, or if you hated it, maybe you started to get into it. But it was, I think, A Different Shade of Blue was the record that I started to grow they started to grow on me. And then those singles, those Upon Lost singles, like the two
Oh yeah, like
tracks,
Lost in the Willow or
yeah,
whatever.
like Deep in the Willow and
Deep in the
Everything Is
Willow, yeah.
Quiet Now. I think that's when I finally became a fan. Like I liked some of their stuff, but still like for me it was like vocally I couldn't like super get into it. So when this album dropped after those two singles, um, even the feature with Poppy, like that's the song Suffocate, uh, and then Sit and Mourn for me is just an awesome track.
Yeah,
And it's
that's my
strange
favorite
too
track from the
because
album.
like hardcore, especially like older, we'll call it classic hardcore, but I know people, old heads will shit on that because, hardcore has existed since the 70s, 80s. Like, I mean, there are some, that's to me, that's punk. Like, that's more punk to me. Like, hardcore is sort of like a little bit heavy. I don't want to get into semantics because I don't want to lose that battle. But like, for me, hardcore is a little bit like on the heavier side of punk. So like, my introduction to hardcore was like Madball. Um, like the good thing about hardcore was always like shorter songs, like punch you in the mouth and get out of there kind of stuff. And like they do that on a lot of their track. Like so many of their songs are less than 3 minutes, which is such a hardcore thing to do.
Yeah,
But then you get a
for
song
sure.
like Sit and Mourn that it doesn't stray away from hardcore. Like so many modern hardcore bands are starting to drift into metalcore. You've seen it with so many modern hardcore bands. I'll throw Stick to Your Guns out there as one that's like most recent. Like I've been listening to Stick to Your Guns forever. Throw out like A Day to Remember even, and like some of their early records were hardcore leaning, and now they're like a pop band. Uh,
Yeah,
like like it seems like hardcore bands have such like a niche that like to get more popular, they almost have to stray into metalcore or into like popular metal, like the A Day to Remember route or the Stick to Your Guns route. But somehow, Knocked Loose, without sacrificing their sound, without really sacrificing like their genre, are now nominated for a fucking Grammy. Like and are on Jimmy Kimmel and are somehow like playing Coachella and like doing all this crazy shit. Like how is this band with these vocals not straying really from their sound, really like kind of traditional hardcore with their own twist on it, still gaining like mainstream popularity? That's wild to me.
yeah.
Um
I do think too, like even though they're not necessarily like prog, like you said, those two tracks that they put out was kind of like it was almost like they had sort of like a concept album. Like obviously it wasn't a full album, but they had like very similar like theme to them, and they like play them back to back. And there's like the movie that they made with it is very like a prog thing to do. And even like this album, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed to, all kind of has a similar like theme to it, and like it feels very like concept albumy. So I feel like it kind of leans into the prog stuff without necessarily being prog.
yeah, like
So
those
it's
are all
kind
like
of
elements of progressive music and like they don't, while they really like lean heavily into those traditional hardcore sort of, you know, less than 3 minutes, doesn't really stray from the song structure like of what hardcore music is or was. Not really drifting into the metalcore scene or anything like that. They're kind of staying true to their sound and to their roots. They do experiment with, they experiment conceptually and having a concept and basing your lyrics, having your album rooted in a concept is very much prog. So
yeah.
I would never say Knocked Loose is prog, but like
No, no.
I
But
mean,
they're doing some
this,
proggy things.
yeah, maybe not musically, but at least lyrically.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and
that's why
yeah,
it's on this list, because it's good
it's on this list because we
and it's
fucking
close
like
enough.
it. But yeah, so that record, it's very good. It's definitely my favorite Knocked Loose record. Take that with a grain of salt. All you like, long time Knocked Loose fans. I've just recently become a fan. Um, so yeah, so Knocked Loose falls at number 5. Number 4. Now we're getting into it. Here we go. one of the godfathers of modern prog, in my opinion, Opeth, The Last Will and Testament. First off, I just want to say harsh vocal Opeth is back.
Yeah,
They
I'm
stopped.
happy.
They stopped making records with harsh vocals on Heritage 2000, which was released in 2011. And I was just thinking about this today. I was like, there's probably an entire generation of Opeth listeners who are just now getting to hear like Opeth with harsh vocals, because like I feel like we came into sort of our like own musical whatever like in the early 2000s maybe.
Yeah,
So like this being like the early 2010s, whenever they completely switched and stopped doing harsh vocals, like there are probably people who discovered Opeth on Heritage and like maybe went back and listened to their back catalog or whatever. But like this is probably I mean, this is clearly the first new heavy, like heavy vocal, harsh vocal Opeth record for like an entire generation of like prog listeners, which is kind
yeah.
of wild.
It is crazy too that like they didn't just like bring a little bit back. Like they just oh we're just gonna like a song or two. Like it's predominantly heavy like screaming vocals.
Yeah, it's like
And there's
very
like
much.
barely singing.
Yeah,
So
it's freaking awesome. I think it's
but
a
it's
great
sweet, yeah.
record. Uh and like we were
I
just
like
yeah, go
the
ahead.
idea of this concept album too. Like the
Yeah.
fact that the album is just like a guy like reading his last will and testament.
Yeah, like this, it's like set in World War I era, and it's just a dude like reading his last, and like there's all kinds of twists and turns, and like the family bullshit, and like,
Yeah,
uh,
it's a really cool concept.
and
And
with each track literally just being like, this is just paragraph one of my will, and this is
yeah,
paragraph
section
two,
one,
like
two, three.
so
And
crazy.
yeah, it's like a if a legal document were an album.
Yeah, talk about concept records. God damn.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they do that shit so well. I mean, they've inspired so many like modern progressive metal bands that like for good reason. And like this record is just a reminder, like, hey, we can do this shit too.
Yeah.
Like, just such a great record, and just the transitions between just death metal heavy shit to like proggy and experimental shit to like this is jazzy as shit back to death metal vocals. You're just like, wow, these guys are
Yeah.
fucking
The one thing like I
legit.
wish that they like added sort of like almost a subtitle to the songs cuz just calling it like
Just give it like
section
sunk.
4
Yeah.
is just like and then going back and being like which one of
What
these is
section
my
was that in?
favorite? And so I had to like listen to it and like actively have my like album of the year spreadsheet open and write down like which one was my favorite cuz I'm like I don't remember which one had the crazy jazzy part in it. And
Yeah.
it was like I remember that I liked all of the songs, but that one in particular was the one that like stood out to me and like really wowed me and was like, this is really cool. But I'm like, I don't know which one it was because
Yeah.
they're all named section 1, 2, 3. It's just like,
That's
so
true, because you can't like usually songs are named after whatever line or
like a line in the chorus
phrase
or
was
something.
prominent in the chorus. Yeah, and you
Yeah.
can't really do that. That's funny. I didn't even think about that. I didn't write down my favorite tracks for this. I think it was either section 3 or section 4. Maybe it's both of those.
I
Like
was gonna say
one.
4 is the one that was my favorite, which is the one that had the like jazz flute solo in it.
Yeah.
And and I just was like, I think because I've been listening to a lot more like jazzy stuff, that like when I got to that track and wasn't expecting it, it was like a really nice surprise. And I was like, oh, cool. I really like this. So
I just can't even imagine being that creative. Like I can't even like picture a world where like I'm writing a genre transcending progressive metal record based on some dude in World War I's last will and testament. Like I can't even like I've never woken up one day and been like, I'm gonna do that. Like that's just insane to me. That
yeah,
like
that's
how
like
can just people are nuts how creative they can be. That's just wild to me.
yeah. And the thing too is like, I mean, maybe some people don't agree and don't like this album, but I think like it is just so creative in like the concept, the of the album, like the delivery of the album, the different like genre blending that they do, and all of it like works very well. And it's just like none of it feels forced in my opinion. Whereas like if you're trying to cram this much creativity and this many different genres of music into one album, it could very easily feel like, oh, you're just like hard cutting and like insert part here of genre X
Right.
and stuff, but this like does not feel that way. It feels very well put together and blended, and it's just a spectacular album.
Yeah, it's insane. So definitely, I mean, I feel like most people who are probably listening to this know who Opeth is, has probably listened to this record and probably feels similarly that we do. But if you've not listened to this record, don't know who Opeth is, or maybe you just haven't had a chance to discover Opeth, or I don't even know. I don't know how at this point, but definitely go check this record out. It's incredible. Heavy Opeth is back, and I love it. Um, Flipping to a not as heavy record.
Now cresting into the top three.
Top three. Getting close to the end here, but Caligula's Horse, Charcoal Grace is our number 3 record. It could easily be number 1. These top 3 for me were just like the big highlights. I mean, honestly, top like that Opeth record can be lumped into there too, but
yeah.
Caligula's Horse, just masterclass in progressive rock, progressive metal. I mean, it's insane. Kind of like Opeth, but not quite the same. Like their ability to flip between just heavy riffs, face melting solo, crazy guitar work into like delicate emotional like set the scene type like melodies. I mean, there's few bands in progressive metal that do it like Caligula's Horse does.
Yeah. I think like Jim's vocals are just so
Perfect.
good. Yeah, they fit the music so well, and it's like I don't know, some of the instrumentation is like really heavy, and then like with the predominantly clean singing, like people may say like, oh, I wish he would do more like harsh vocals and stuff, but I don't know, there's something that works so well with that like juxtaposition, and like he does have just like such a good singing voice that
I wish we would have asked him when we interviewed him, like, because I feel like his vocal style and quality and whatever would lend to like, how many features Daniel Tompkins does on like he's just on everybody's record, like
yeah,
he's just always like, I feel like Jim Gray should be that guy too, like I would
yeah,
love to see him featured on like some of these other bands' records, just like coming in like a heavy band, and then all of a sudden you got a Jim Gray like verse, like
dude,
I just feel like.
I feel like I could get on board with like a Monuments featuring Jim Gray
Yeah,
or
yeah, and
something
that's
like
another
that would
guy,
be cool.
Andy Sizik or Chiswick or
Yeah,
however the shit you
they
put it.
could
Like he does
swap
it. Yeah, they just swap around. Like, yeah, I mean,
and a
yeah,
feature on
Jim,
each.
awesome vocalist, awesome dude. If you guys haven't checked it out already, we interviewed Jim Gray. Like I think right before or right after this record dropped. I don't remember. I think right before.
Yeah, it was right before.
So really cool conversation. I feel like it was a good interview, probably one of the best we've done. So definitely go check that out if you haven't. Get a little bit of a different insight into this record. We touch on some things before it drops, so you get sort of some of the emotional aspects. Because that's one thing with this record. I feel like while it is their heaviest to date, in my opinion, like instrumentally, it's also like heaviest for like subject matter. As we talked about with our interview with him, this was written predominantly during the pandemic time where a lot of people, struggled with, when you're on lockdown, when you're just stuck with your thoughts, man, that's a scary ass place. I mean, coming
Yeah,
from me, that's not fun for anybody. So like, talking about loss and just the intricacies of, human relationships and how that sort of is whenever you're locked down and, like going through such a global crisis, like really gives you sort of a different perspective on that record lyrically, and you can sort of really feel the emotions from, the fact that this was written at that time, and that it's written at that time, and then you listen to it with, through a different lens, like you can really feel the emotions in this record,
yeah,
the heavy subject matter, but also, hey, he screams in in one of the songs, so it's like, hey, that's heavy.
yeah.
But
Well, I think then the album came out earlier in the year, and I was listening to it so heavily at the beginning of the year, and was like, this is definitely like has album of the year contender material, and then like a bunch of albums came out through the middle of the year, and so it kind of like I didn't get to give it as much love in kind of the middle of the year, and I found myself like going back to it in like these past few months and sort of having this like reinvigoration of like listening to it again and almost feeling like I'm listening to it for the first time again. It was
Yeah.
like, oh man, it's just like this album is so good.
That's honestly like another reason why I love doing this episode every year, is because so many of those records that we were so high on, this one included, like early in the year, you get to sort of discover
Yeah.
it like while you're listening towards the end to come up with your final rankings. This was definitely like the record for me as well. Like, so listening to "The World Breathes with Me" or "Mute" again, and just like having it had it had been such a long time since I really listened to that record, and hearing it in the context of the record again, it's just like almost hearing it for the first time again, and being reminded of how like really incredible this record is and some of those songs are. And yeah, insane record, so emotional, so heavy at times. It's wild.
Yeah, it was
But
there was the other day we were listening to it on vinyl while we were well, me and my wife were cooking, and I was like just like had to stop for a moment because like, oh, this is so good. It's like usually I was just kind of, it's like what we have on spinning on our record player is just kind of like background while we're cooking and eating dinner and stuff. But there's like some of the tracks that come on, it's like, oh, I gotta stop for a moment and just soak
just
this in.
feel it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Caligula's Horse, Charcoal Grace, number 3, incredible record, incredible band, incredible people, awesome. So cool to see that live too, but I'm not gonna. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. But moving on to number 2, and an artist that I feel like, while we maybe heard some of his work previously, this was kind of the year of discovery, at least for me personally, for his music. And that's Tigran Hamasyan, the Bird of a Thousand Voices. I probably butchered his last name. I apologize. So we're just going to call him Tigran from now on. But yeah, like I said, while we maybe had heard some of his music previously, I feel like we hadn't taken a full dive until this year. And I think we heard, we're kind of encouraged to do that from our good friends, crazy talented band Exploring Birdsong. We did an interview with them, and they had mentioned Tigran as an influence, and yeah, I mean that was enough for us to go check them out, especially with how much we love Exploring Birdsong, and saw that this record was coming out and heard a couple songs from it, and we're like, holy shit, this is gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
And it was.
Yeah, and it definitely, like, for anyone who hasn't listened to Tigran but has listened to Exploring Birdsong because of how we recommend you do so, they definitely, like, you can see the similarities, very like piano forward, heavy, kind of like jazzy progressive rock kind of metal straddling that line.
Yeah. One thing I'll say is this dude might be the most talented person on the face of the planet. Like this project, like Bird of a Thousand Voices, wasn't even just a record. It was a record with an accompanying film, a documentary, a fully playable video game, and a stage show. It's just all this project. It's insane. It's all rooted in this Armenian folk tale. He's Armenian himself, so like really written in this concept that's like true to his roots, and like in all these different forms. It's insane. Like, again, how are people this fucking talented? Like, and why didn't I get any of that? Like,
I just want an ounce,
just a little bit. Like, that's just so crazy. Like, I would never wake up and just be like, I'm going to conceptually create all these different forms of expression of this folk tale that I've grew up with.
Yeah, and it feels very like, we've talked ad nauseum about like the Coheed fan base and like how we love like the comic book tie-in with and all this stuff, and it's like he's doing that with a video game.
And it's like I had always thought I'd always thought that was like the peak. Like, oh, he's got comic books and like writes music about it, and that's cool. And again, I'm not knocking that. That's sick. Like, that's also super creative and way more creative than I'd ever be. But like some of these bands, some of these concepts are just insane. Like,
Yeah, it's like it feels like method acting, where it's like
yeah,
you've committed your entire life to this one piece of work, and you're trying to like make all these other mediums that all tie into this one piece of work, and it like
and then to have the talent level to fucking bring it to life. Like, I could wake up one morning and be like, I'm gonna create this entire universe of, like this story that my mom read to me when I was a kid, and then like put my whole like life into it, and then have it suck ass because I don't have any talent. Like, this dude, how do you do all these things based off this one like concept?
yeah,
It's just
it's
crazy.
it is crazy.
And the music is good, like so good,
Yeah.
like out of body experience good.
Yeah, and it feels like we had referred to Exploring Birdsong with like Piano Gent.
Yeah, at
It does.
times,
It
yeah,
does have a bit of that, like in the Curse, "Blood of an Innocent is Spilled." There's a
yeah.
very like genty piano riff, and that's really cool.
It
Um,
feels like a score of a movie too, like, and I guess that because there's a feature film, that makes sense that it feels that way. But like
yeah,
with the
I didn't
reoccurring
realize that there was
themes,
the film. I need to watch
yeah,
it.
yeah. I don't even know if like I don't know if it's out or if it's I have no idea. But all I know is like all of this stuff is like wrapped around this project, and like what I love in Prague, just like and just I mean, it feels like one insanely good collection composition of music, like just one from start to finish, like all flows together so perfectly. Like, you literally, when you're listening to the music, like eyes closed, headphones on, like you're taken on a journey. Like, it's wild, like that it actually feels like you're in a film, and oh, I
Yeah,
heard that like 2 tracks ago, this same sort of theme, and this like it's just crazy, just so talented, insane. I just
yeah.
want just an ounce of that talent. But like, yeah, this is instrumental. I mean, there's a little bit of like vocal, like chanting and stuff like that, sort of mixed in to just lend to the music. But it's very much like, it sounds like you're at an orchestra. Like, it sounds like you're sitting there.
Yeah, it's
Like,
like you said. It's kind of it's more like chanting, like not specific, like not actual like vocals. It's kind
yeah,
of just like humming
yeah,
and stuff.
yeah. So don't expect like blast beats and like breakdowns and stuff like that. It's very much like you said, piano forward, like orchestral. Like, that's kind of how I would. But like, if we listen to heavy music, we listen to prog and metal and death metal and whatever the shit you want to, we liked this record enough to put it in number 2. And I
Yeah,
think at one point for both of us, this was at number 1. Like, that's how crazy this like, you will like this record, at least elements of it. So like,
yeah.
you
It's
know,
well, I think
stray from your comfort zone and go check this out. It's insane.
yeah. I was gonna say like I think to note is I feel like a lot of people in Prague also enjoy jazz, but I think Tigran first and foremost is kind of like a contemporary jazz artist, but he is like insanely heavily leaning into the progressive rock flavor. But like I think
Yeah.
first and foremost he's a jazz artist.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's
So
not like a
like
metal. This isn't a metal band. This
yeah,
isn't
so if
a,
you don't like jazz, then like maybe this won't be for you. But even still, I feel like you should give it a try because it also has the like piano gent kind of stuff to it. And it's like, it's also like way heavier than you would expect based off of the description I just gave it that he is a, contemporary jazz artist. Um, so I definitely think like I would recommend anyone listening to this podcast listens to this album if they have not.
like, clearly the most unique record on this list, but like objectively the best album on this list. Like, I just, from like a pure talent perspective, just a pure, like, if you just say purely from a musical composition standpoint,
Yeah.
like the amount of skill that went into this record versus the others. And I'm not trying to diminish any of these other records, but like, objectively, this is probably the quote unquote best musical composition on this list.
From like, yeah, I mean, the music is complex,
Yeah.
and like
That doesn't mean it's, like complex doesn't always mean good, or you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like I'm just saying
in
objectively.
this case it does, but
And in this case it does, but I'm just saying objectively, if you
Yeah.
want to approach it just from like a musical composition standpoint, this is probably objectively the best record on
as
this list.
objectively as one
Yeah,
can.
right.
Objectively,
Again, that
rank
doesn't
music.
always mean that it's the best or someone's favorite or whatever, but like,
Yeah.
I can listen to a Taylor Swift song and objectively say that the songwriting was good. That doesn't mean that I'm going to go listen to it again or that I like it or that it's my favorite.
Yeah.
Sorry for using that as an example.
No, I
We're
think
getting off the rails.
that's a good point though, that like it doesn't, maybe it's not for you, but I definitely recommend checking it out because you should be able to at least see the skill and talent and
see-
like the
and see where we're
composition
coming from.
involved. And even if you're not like a musically inclined person, because like I am not, but
I would be surprised if there's not at least a section of this composition that you don't vibe with to some capacity.
Yeah,
like anybody listening to this.
Yeah,
because there
I
are
think it's
moments
cool.
where it feels very much like, you can tell that Tigran probably inspires a lot of the modern, metal bands, especially instrumental metal bands, Aviations. Another band that we interviewed. I'm not trying to shout out every interview we've done. Obviously, Exploring Birdsong being a piano forward band themselves, but like I'm sure he's inspired probably so many of the bands that you already listened to today. I think if you listen to it sort of with an open mind, you'd be able to pull the different things that he's doing conceptually, musically, instrumentally. That you're like, oh, I can kind of see where maybe a band like Aviations would take inspiration from this and stuff like that. So. Definitely go give this record a listen. It's incredible. But I think we should move on to number one now. What could possibly beat this record with all this shit that we've just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is a record that I feel like people, I don't know. Like I'm really curious to see, because currently it's in the final four right now. Of our fan vote. So I think people clearly like this record too. So I don't
or at least our listeners do.
Yeah. Imminence, The Black. So it's funny, like I had listened to Imminence before.
I actually had them pop up on my TikTok.
And I'd forgotten because I was already following them on Spotify. And how I was reminded was it popped up on TikTok for me too, of him like doing a breakdown while playing the violin, and I'm just like, oh, that's sick. And I was like, oh, wait, I've listened to this band before. And then I listened to the record in its entirety. And like I said it earlier in this, there's a lot of different things that I'm a sucker for in metal. And one of those things is when bands blend sort of orchestral elements into their sound. And the fact that they have a lead violinist / vocalist, kind of like you just automatically already have that in your sound.
That's also a wild mix.
It is pretty wild. Yeah.
Because like just the way you have to hold the violin like with your like kind of like your chin, it's like to try and get the sounds to do like the screaming and the clean vocals that he does.
Yeah, it's impressive
while
as
having like your shoulder cinched to your violin, which is then, pressed against your chin, is like it kind of restricts your airflow and, makes it harder to sing. So the fact that he can do both harsh and clean vocals and do them well while also playing violin is another, yet again, I wish I had an ounce of their talent.
Yeah, just a little bit. That's all I'm asking for. Like, but like,
and I'll take it from any of them.
Yeah, any of it. Yeah,
whoever wants to share.
Yep, not picky. But I've heard them described as violin core, which I think is funny.
That is funny.
But yeah, another one of those records where it's just like one flawless composition, start to finish. Everything blends together. There's an underlining theme, which I think is mostly like mental health, internal struggles. Like The Black is sort of like your internal like struggles with your mental health and stuff like that. Lyrically, it seems to lend to that theme. So like that's kind of what I get from it. Music and lyrics are always like sort of up for interpretation, but that's kind of what I get from it. And I feel like instrumentally it really lends to that theme too. Like it's very ambient, the orchestral stuff really sort of lends to that like emotional feel, well, with still some crushingly heavy breakdowns mixed in. The vocals are, mixture of cleans and heavies that just really work perfectly. I feel like they're mixed really well. Um, and yeah, just listening to this all put together through some good headphones. Uh, yeah, it's next level. I found myself spending the most time with this record, like unforced. Like it's not like, oh, I got to go listen to this record to figure out if I like it. Like if I'm sitting down, like I spent a lot, like whenever I was traveling to Denmark for work, I spent a lot of time with this record. And because that's what I wanted to listen to. And I
Yeah.
felt like when I'm listening to it, it just made me want to listen to it more. And I think that's what kind of made me realize like it's a no-brainer. This has been my favorite piece of music this year.
Yeah, I think the thing I enjoy about it is like when you said about kind of the violin core is I feel like I get touches of like early Architects
Okay.
sound and at times like that sort of like harsh but clean vocal, like that sort of in between where he has that kind of like gravelly but like still doing singing. It kind of reminds me of Corey Brandon from Norma Jean a little. Um, so I'm like getting these like hints of bands that I really enjoy. It's like some older Architects, some Norma Jean, but then like you throw the violin in there, which is like something new and fresh and different in the metalcore scene, and it's kind of like that mix just works. And like you're saying about spending a lot of time with it, I we were talking about this earlier, but I got my new headphones and went back to listen to it and was like, initially I had Tigran first and then had Imminent second, and like went back to listen to kind of my top like three or four with, and was like using my new headphones and just like hearing Imminence with like the improved soundstage on like better quality headphones was just like, wow, there's like a lot of stuff in here that I didn't really hear listening to with like, not as good earbuds, and like now having like good headphones is like, oh man, yeah, I guess this is my number one,
Yeah.
and made the flip. And then like after I switched, I listened again to just like really solidify, like, am I sure I want to do this? Because I've really enjoyed that Tigran album, but I was just like, no, I Eminence takes it for me, which is saying something with how high we were on Tigran's album.
I was
So
gonna say, I feel like we just really hyped up Tigran, and then like, it was a tough act to follow. Come in and talk
yeah,
about Eminence, and like, it's tough for me to sort of, I don't know, Tigran, that record again, objectively, musically, like was really good. This is just one step below that from a musical composition standpoint because I feel like the talent level's there, but I feel like vocally and all that stuff, like this record just I connected to more emotionally or whatever. Like I think that just gave it the edge for me. I mean, it's a record that I'm probably gonna like end this and then go listen to. You know what I mean? Like it's
yeah,
just how I feel about that record. Uh, it's not just hype for me or anything like that. Like I just very much enjoy this record, and it's one that there are other records that have been my album of the year in the past that I still listen to like religiously. Spring Island being one of those from Delta Sleep. Um, Altered State by Tesseract is one of those records that stands the test of time for me. Like this is probably one of those records for me. And the fact that I'm mentioning it in the same breath as Altered State, which is just to me perfection, um, should help show how strongly I feel about this record. And I hope that like there's not a huge group of people out there that are just like, oh, it's just one of those goddamn TikTok bands or whatever the shit. Because like that's what made me nervous about liking this record so much is because I did rediscover them via TikTok, which is like makes me feel like dirty in a way, like
like
because
it's tainted.
yeah, like and I hope that like
That's a,
the music stands for itself, like I Prevail was one of those bands where it's just like they came out of nowhere because they did a Taylor Swift cover and threw it all over social media, and now they're like this super overhyped popular band that like still kind of makes below average garbage music that people still tend to like love. Like I don't want people to feel that way about this band. Like they're actually making good music. Like
Yeah,
whether or not they caught fire because of a TikTok thing or whatever the shit like doesn't matter in this instance to me, but I don't know.
and I think like the TikTok algorithm is also like very different from person to person. So like
True.
it's very possible that like no one listening to this even got this video,
That's
and
true.
we're the
I
only
just
two.
I just
But
assume everyone gets the same shit as me, which I'm sorry if you do. It's mostly weird shit. Shout out Brandon. But yeah, our buddy who did the gaming channel there for a little while. Hopefully he'll get back into that at some point. But sends us very interesting TikToks on a daily basis, and it is really messed with our algorithms. I get some weird shit. Well, I'm speaking for myself, I guess. I get a lot of weird shit now. Uh,
well, I feel like mine's a pretty well curated mix of chaos and music
right,
that
well,
I enjoy. But
maybe it is just specific to me. Maybe I am the problem. Uh, but regardless, I'm just hoping that like the hype is like other. I hope other people feel the same way that I do about this record,
yeah,
the same way that you do about this. We do about this record because we both had this as our album of the year. Like there was no
yeah,
debate.
and that was like we weren't even like we didn't discuss it
Nope.
beforehand. We like jumped on to like do our aggregated like collective
Yeah.
progressive gentleman top 10, and we're both like, well, we both agree Eminence is number one. So
Yeah.
I feel like
And
there's got to
Tigran was
be
number 2 for both of us too.
yeah.
We both were on the same page for the most part this year, which I mean, we usually have a lot of similarities. It's just like the order is different, but like this year I feel like we had more, especially our top 2 was the same. So that's
Yeah, and I think I don't know where Caligula's horse landed for you, but I feel like we had them also like pretty high on both of our lists as
yeah,
well.
I think
So
I had them third, which is where they landed. Yeah, I had them third.
okay, I had
So,
them fourth. So it
yeah.
was
So
like
this
yeah, we were
was my
very
top 3.
yeah
This actually was my top 4. I had Opeth fourth too.
yeah. It's like so our lists were like very similar. I think we
It
only
was
had like
yeah.
one or two artists that differed,
Yeah, the
and then
intervals and
like
darkest hour like were the ones that you had on one and I had on one, and then I think Poppy and Averlies we had different, but
yeah
for the most part, like very similar, and I think we were both pretty content with the way the list shook out. So, um, but to recap that list because we've been talking for quite a bit, and I'm sure most people have forgotten at this point. Number 1 album of the year, Imminence, The Black. Number 2, Tigran with The Bird of a Thousand Voices. Number 3, Caligula's Horse, Charcoal Grace. Number 4, Opeth, The Last Will and Testament. Number 5, Knocked Loose, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed to. Number 6, Fit for an Autopsy, The Nothing That Is. Number 7, Better Lovers, Highly Irresponsible. Number 8, Poppy, Negative Spaces. Number 9, Vola, Friend of a Phantom. And number 10, Averlies, Freaks. We had 2 honorable mentions, Darkest Hours, Perpetual Terminal, and Intervals, Memory Palace. And we also did a EP of the year, Novelist Okapi. So all incredible pieces of music. Yeah, this was fun. I always enjoy doing this
Yeah.
shit, and it was nice to sort of get back together and be able to do an episode and a long episode like this one and talk about so much cool shit. And hopefully everybody listening enjoyed it as well. Next year, I think I'm not going to promise anything ever again, but next year we're hoping to expand on this even further. This year we're doing 3 awards basically: the fan voted album of the year, our album of the year, which was Imminence the Black, and then EP of the year, Novelist Okapi. We talked about maybe doing a song of the year, but we literally talked about it right before getting on to record this. So like,
and there were too many
there are
good
just
songs
too
for us
many.
to come to
Yeah.
a cohesive like one song to roll them all.
Yeah, so I think next year we'll approach the year with that in mind, like maybe keep sort of a running like what we think is the song of the year and then wait for it to be unseated and then just kind of go from there. That way we at least know like we have it planned ahead of time. We also talked about doing like a breakdown of the year or riff of the year, just to like expand on that a little bit. We'll do the fan voted album of the year thing again next year because that seems to be going well.
Yeah,
maybe
it's
we'll
fun to do.
expand on some of the fan voting stuff, but that's something to think about. But at the very least, we're going to keep the album of the year fan voting going. I'm really excited to see how that shakes out. I'm interested. I think it's going to come down to two records in particular. I just don't want to throw it on here because we're going to do a little episode and we'll talk about that. So, but thank you all for the participation on that stuff as well. That's been awesome. Thank you for continuing to follow us and support us. Thank you for giving us the platform to be able to get verified on Instagram, which is really cool. And
we appreciate you sticking around despite our brief hiatus there.
Yeah.
Which was brief, not
unannounced surprise hiatus. Yeah, I mean, we did not intend.
We tried to keep the content rolling on Instagram, though, at least to have like new music and
so you knew we were still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tried to at least keep that going because that's something we could do from a distance, and hopefully this coming year is not as crazy, and we can keep pumping out episodes. I know there's some interviews too that we had scheduled that ended up falling through because scheduling and all that stuff, and I know that there's a couple there that we could still definitely bring back, and so hopefully we can pick back up on that stuff and just in general content. Just keep the content, keep it rolling, making content. So thank you guys so much for sticking with us and for listening, and until next time, thanks again. We'll catch you later.
Thanks.